Americans are sick and tired of being sick and tired of the partisanship that has gripped our nation's capital.
Our differences in foreign policy should end at the water's edge.
To be honest, I think that my hope for the future is that we become more partisan than we are right now.
It is time to put partisanship aside and put our country first.
I would convene a continuous advisory meeting with not just Democrats, but Republicans, specifically on national security issues.
And basically, to me, most people are really green and they may not know it.
I've reached across the aisle to my favorite Democrat, Joe Lieberman, and Russ Feingold, and Ted Kennedy, and others, because I know how we must get things done.
And I believe that there are a lot of Republicans who hunger for that kind of bipartisan approach.
I don't really believe in anything that the other side believes in. So although I don't want to say I vote just because they're Republicans, to me, some of the worst Republicans, I'm going to have more in common with them than some of the best liberals.
I want Republicans and Democrats and independents to understand that as president, I am going to want to go before the entire world and say, America's back. We're ready to lead.
Hi everyone, my name is Diane Lozich. I have a wonderful husband and 3 beautiful children. I was born in Frankfurt, Germany, but my family is from the island of St. Lucia. My mother moved me to the United States in 1979 because she wanted me to have more opportunities, and then I became a citizen in 1986. I grew up reading, watching, and talking politics with my father, so naturally when I went to college I majored in political science. Well, after a few internships for a U.S. Senator, I realized that it was not a good fit. Yet I always cared and paid attention to what was going on in politics. I became an independent 5 years ago because I have such serious doubts about political parties and how our political system currently functions. This film is my quest to understand partisanship, what people who are in parties think about partisanship and its effect on our government and communities. I interviewed a wide range of people, from Green Party members to Constitution Party members, but I asked everyone the exact same 20 questions. Each person that we interviewed is a political activist or a member of a political group. They're speaking as individuals, not as representatives for their political group or party. I made this documentary because I want to open a few minds to questioning if our current type of partisanship in politics is necessary, and to also find out what other people think we really need. But first, let's be clear about what partisanship is. Partisanship is defined as a fervent, sometimes militant supporter or proponent of a party, cause, faction, person, or idea. A member of an organized body of fighters who attack or harass an enemy, especially within occupied territory, a guerrilla. Devoted to or biased of a party, group, or cause, partisan politics.
Congressman, you don't think that changed with the 9/11 attacks, sir?
What changed?
The non-interventionist policies.
No, non-intervention was a major contributing factor. Have you ever read about the reasons they attacked us? They attack us because we've been over there. We've been bombing Iraq for 10 years. We've been in the Middle East. I think Reagan was right. We don't understand the irrationality of Middle Eastern politics. So right now we're building an embassy in Iraq that's bigger than the Vatican. We're building 14 permanent bases. What would we say here if China was doing this in our country or in the Gulf of Mexico? We would be objecting. We need to look at what we do from the perspective of what would happen if somebody else did it to us.
Are you suggesting we invited the 9/11 attacks, sir?
I'm suggesting that we listen to the people who attacked us and the reason they did it. And they are delighted that we're over there because Osama bin Laden has said, I am glad you're over on our sand because we can target you so much easier.
The day that Senator Obama decided to cast a vote to not fund my son when he was serving, sent a cold chill through my body. Let me tell you, I would suggest that Senator Obama change shoes with me for just one day and see what it means to have a loved one serving in the armed forces and, more importantly, serving in harm's way.
When
Senator Palin said to Joe Biden, or Governor Palin said to Joe Biden, that our plan to get our economy out of the ditch was somehow a job-killing plan. That's what she said. I wonder if she turned on the news this morning. Because it was just reported that America has experienced its 9th straight month of job loss. 9 straight months. Just since January, we've lost more than 750,000 jobs across America. 7,000 in Pennsylvania alone. This is the economy that John McCain said just 2 weeks ago was fundamentally strong. This is the economy that my opponent said made great progress under the policies of George W. Bush. And those are the economic policies that he proposes to continue another 4 years.
This is little Hussein. Little Hussein wanted to see truth and good Americans.
A lucky viewer gets a fictional can of Aunt Sarah's Moose Stew. You can enter our random drawing to receive this thing at our website, countdown.msnbc.com. Just remember, you do the watching, let the governor do the lying.
They took impeachment off the table. They won't end the Iraq war. They beat war drums against Iran. Now they're talking about sending troops to Pakistan. Republicans? No, these are Democratic leaders I'm talking about. I'm a Democrat, but not that kind of Democrat. I'm a real Democrat. The kind who talks about getting out of Iraq now. No war against Iran, no troops to Pakistan, repeal the Patriot Act, and impeach. If I'm your kind of Democrat, then I'll be your kind of president. A courageous vote is the only vote worth casting.
Ancient Rome seemed to have been the first democratic state to have 2 political parties. The patricians were the upper class, the nobility, the wealthy landowners. The plebeians were the poor, lower class. It is also important to note that American political parties began as private associations. They were not mentioned in the Constitution and are not regulated by state or federal laws. No political party has died out since the Whigs in the 1850s. One reason for the endurance of political parties is that they are now so woven into our legal fabric. This gives them a certain degree of protection even when the public desires to weaken them. One example occurred when California Democrats and Libertarians protested the state's restrictive laws prohibiting them from making party endorsements as an infringement on their free speech rights. Well, the Supreme Court ended up siding with the parties and added to the legal doctrine of the rights of association. Speaking for a unanimous court, Justice Thurgood Marshall said that the right to association doesn't just mean the rights of the individual voter, it also means the rights of the parties to choose who they associate with. Here's my first question. Has either party made choices or acted in a way that you thought was distracting from a constructive political dialogue?
My dear friend, Mr. Clinton and Mr. Lewinsky was very, very destructive to this country, in my opinion.
Any other stories that you can think of?
I think this whole...
What about Mark Sanford and those types of things? The Republican governor, and he was so promising.
Yeah, I don't understand that. I don't. Very, very disappointing. Very disappointing, yes.
The Democrats sometimes kind of use fear also as far as fear of the Republicans. You know, be scared of the Republicans because if we elect the Republicans, you know, they're gonna, you know, come in here and everyone's gonna have a gun and they kind of go too far with it, I think. So I think all the primaries are I'm a bigger Republican or I'm a bigger Democrat than you are, and here's what we're, you know, and then it boils down to a battle between the biggest Republican and the biggest Democrat.
I think our current president, you know, is constantly, I mean, he has certain agendas he's pushing, and you know, and he uses his personality as a great personality, you know, to distract the people from what he's really saying.
I was very embarrassed with the Republican Party, the way they kept encouraging encouraging the audiences and the crowds to, you know,
you're talking about during
shout,
the election.
Shout socialist and terrorist and all this other stuff.
We don't really know the context of everything that's really going on. So Rush Limbaugh did that thing, I don't know if it was before or after Barack got it. And I'm...
Which thing?
The deal where he said, somebody, probably MSNBC, but I don't know, pushed up and said, Rush Limbaugh wants Barack to fail. His whole sentence was, if Barack Obama intends to make the United States into a socialist country, I hope that he fails.
They called General Petraeus a liar before he even testified. Mrs. Clinton said she had to willingly suspend disbelief or whatever to listen to Petraeus. We're in the process of winning the war. The last thing they wanted was to win. They hoped George Bush failed. So where is it? What is so strange about being honest and saying, I want Barack Obama to fail, if his mission is to restructure and reform this country so that capitalism and individual liberty are not its foundation? Why would I want that to succeed?
Most of them were very offended by the remarks of, what's her name? Janine Garofalo.
What remarks did she make?
Well, she said, and this is the best ever. She said, she was regarding the Tea Party people, right? And she said, well, those guys are just a bunch of straight up, redneck racist, straight up, like that. And I'm like, yeah.
It's not about bashing Democrats. It's not about taxes. They have no idea what the Boston Tea Party was about. That's right. They don't know their history at all. This is about hating a black man in the White House. This is racism straight up.
The deal was the Sotomayor confirmation hearings. I thought it was just nothing more than a show.
The judge said in the speech in Berkeley she doesn't know exactly what the difference would be in her judging, but she did say that I accept there would be some based on my gender and Latina heritage. Now, if somebody suggested in any way that the fact that they were male and white and that would influence their judging, would that not be viewed as discriminatory?
That's a distraction.
Yeah.
I mean, now, wouldn't you think, okay, this is a judge, wouldn't you think they would look into what she did on the bench other than, one or two little cases?
So clearly we have the choice of Sarah Palin, and that kind of was distracting from the message that, John McCain had in the last election cycle. He's obviously a fantastic guy.
I think when John McCain started, using the whole Barack Hussein Obama, I think that was pretty distracting. I mean, hugely distracting. Yeah, it's like, what are you guys debating on anymore these days? And then, Barack he was a classy guy. He handled it well. He was like, no, boom, just vote.
Parties were present but unpopular before the revolution. Parties grew after the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. James Madison said that the public good is often disregarded in the conflict of rival parties. America's founding fathers believed that a nation born in revolution would best be served by not having political parties. Alexander Hamilton deplored parties, equating them with disorder and instability. He had hoped to establish a government that would be above party politics. Unfortunately, by 1796, the founders themselves had moved into two warring camps that became organized into political parties. My next question was, which party is better at keeping campaign promises?
I don't put much stock in anybody being able to uphold all their promises. That's, to me, political fluff that you go through oftentimes in a campaign.
You can't really keep a promise once you become elected in that position. You have to think of the best for the country.
I don't think that there's a general answer to that. It's a broad coalition, and it spans a range of ideas from fairly conservative to maybe downright to the left. On the other hand, if you look at the performance of the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan, who promised a smaller government, they promised us less involvement in our daily lives and in the economy, and it's actually far greater than it has been. So I certainly wouldn't be giving them any awards for following through on their campaign promises either.
Oh goodness, the Green Party. They said they wouldn't get elected, and they have proven themselves right. I don't think that either party keeps any promises to any constituent. I think they keep promises to their special interests, their campaign financiers.
I think both parties have neglected their base and their values.
I'll be cold as ice on that one, neither.
Yeah.
They're
That's
horrible.
what most of our...
Oh. I think they're tie on that one. They both break promises.
Yeah.
Quite frequently.
Really, I think none of them. I think both major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, ride on promises, but then fall short on delivering them.
I'd have to say neither.
The Republicans promise all this cultural stuff about banning abortions and gay marriage and kicking out the immigrants and so on that they're never going to do and never intended to do, and it's just to get the religious fanatics to vote for them. But the Democrats promise grassroots stuff, promise stuff to community groups and labor unions and the mass of people that they never intend to do.
I don't think either one of them are any good.
Neither.
Yeah, that's one of our
They're equally bad.
consensus.
Equally down.
It takes a lot of thought to even figure one instance that's happened. I mean,
Tie.
Yeah, tie at zero, zero to zero.
0-0.
Neither. You know, campaign promises, I don't know the last time somebody that I'm aware of has made a promise and kept it. So, you know, but that's pragmatic politics. You know, he says what he needs to do to win, and when he gets in, he does what he's supposed to do to please his special interest groups. And it's not just Barack Obama, it's everybody.
Herbert F. Weisberg wrote about the development of the concept of the party. In pre-1950s literature, scholars were aware of the idea of party loyalties. They recognized that many people were loyal to one party or the other because of their stance on the Civil War. From 1951 through the 1960s was the period in which the political science discipline became more comfortable with the concept of the party. By the end of this period, the concept had become firmly entrenched in political literature. I was curious to see how party members felt about their platform and other party platforms. So I asked two questions. Are there any stances on issues where you diverge from your party's platform? And are there any ideas in other party platforms that you agree with?
Sometimes I don't like the idea of guns in everybody's hands. It scares me. So I don't know if I'm a real staunch supporter of some of the real right-wing Republicans with guns.
Sure. I mean, there are parts of every party platform I agree with.
Well, I was a Republican.
Okay.
Up until probably 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
And then I switched because I just can't agree with what they've been doing.
I have a lot of friends who are gay. I have friends who are actually or civil union marriage and so forth, but that's their lifestyle. You know, I know another case where I don't think that that we should interfere in.
For me, it's religion.
Okay.
I believe in God. I'm Roman Catholic. I believe in Jesus Christ, but I do recognize that our Constitution says that no one religion is supposed to rule in this country, and I think that the Republicans have taken on religion and made it their base.
You know, my parents and my brother are, you know, I don't want to say pro-war, but they support the war and that sort of thing. But I am not that way.
There was a time during the Clinton administration, he was sending troops into Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia. A lot of the party line was, you know, we have no business there, but my opinion was that there's people suffering and dying over there. We have an obligation to help them.
There are a lot, there's discriminatory aspects of the Democratic Party that I do not agree with. I think that you don't need to segregate in a sense. If two people want to be engaged with one another in a fashion that is not harmful to either party, then they should be able to do that. So if you're going to call it marriage, then call it marriage.
Yeah.
If you're going to call it civil union, then call it civil union. We don't need marriage and civil union.
Honestly, TARP. I'm very against government bailout.
When Bill Clinton issued the welfare reform back then, that's something I vehemently disagree with.
Probably the issue of illegal immigration. I think they're a little bit soft on it.
The party, in my view, the Libertarian Party, has strayed away from, has become much more a platform about what's only achievable in the short run rather than what's ideally what liberty is about. So,
what did you think of Bob Barr as the representative for
I did not vote for him to get the nomination, and I don't think he did very much to help the party.
I mean, there's some people that think that that's what it's going to take in America, some type of mass movement to restore responsible, accountable government. If people understood that there's a couple U.S. Supreme Court justices that say, if we're deprived of our right to present evidence of a crime to a grand jury, we're reduced from the status of a free citizen to no more than a slave. And that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And if we're slaves, and if people realize we're slaves,
Yeah.
and we want that right back, I think we can get that right back. And then we can hold everybody that breaks the law accountable. Even if it's just stopping, you know, police from brutally beating people and stuff. Like the Oscar Grant thing. I mean, you know, the guy's handcuffed and he shoots him. It's outrageous.
You won't find a politician who doesn't respect and praise the Constitution. That's why it's so interesting that the Constitution does not mention political parties either in its original document or in subsequent amendments, and provides very little guidance concerning the status of parties within our political system. Yet our courts have had to grapple with the constitutional status of parties while parties actively work to maximize their freedom of action and power under the law. American party organizations are primarily concerned with controlling the government by winning elections. Politicians created party organizations for this purpose and have altered them over time to improve their own electoral prospects. An interesting perspective on partisanship is given in Ron Brownstein's The Second Civil War. He wrote about 3 structures of American politics which turned the House and Senate from being filled with deal-making politicians to politically polarized factions. One structural change was the beginning of organized pressure on Congress from outside interest groups. Another was the restructuring of rules and practices inside Congress. And the third change was the great sorting out of American politics. He pinpoints that interest groups started influencing dialogue began in March of 1996, when the president of General Motors admitted to a Senate subcommittee that they had sent detectives to snoop on Ralph Nader. Nader had been working as a part-time consultant at the Department of Labor and had published the book Unsafe at Any Speed. Nader's appearance before the subcommittee began a new stage in the relationship between politicians and organized interest. Brownstein wrote that it was as if Nader and his allies had demonstrated a new mathematical proof that challenged the accepted arithmetic of power in Washington. For better or worse, after Nader's breakthrough, more and more interest groups started to emerge, first on the left and then on the right. Together, they forced Washington to consider a much wider and often more polarizing range of issues. The prior time period that Brownstein called the Age of Bargaining had been an insider's age, where leaders had expressed their power mostly in back rooms. Power to set Washington's agenda during that time period had laid in the hands of party leadership. My next question was, do you think political leaders feel more pressure to please voters or to please party hierarchy?
My congressman was elected by less than a percentage point. Got over $1 million in the last 2 weeks from the National Party, the Democratic Party in Washington. All right, in June, when he wanted to vote against the war money IMF bill, the IMF party loves wars, he couldn't do it because they said, you won't get $1 million next time, we'll run somebody against you, we won't vote on your bills, you won't get any earmarks, you won't get any weapons factories, you want to vote with us, we'll buy you radio ads right now. We'll do press events down in your district for no apparent reason with Steny Hoyer and Van Jones, and we'll send everybody down there. They get generals calling him, cabinet secretaries calling him, the threats and the bribes that they're still paying back.
I think it's a delicate balance for them. Yeah. You know, it really is. That's like biting the hand that feeds it almost, you know, but yet in both ways.
Yeah.
People in very safe seats are very likely, I believe, to want to please the political hierarchy because there's something in it for them. They get the choice chairmanship, they get the committee things that they want, they get their pet pork spending bill put through or something like that. The people who think that they're on the edge, or maybe even on the outs, are far more likely to suddenly become listening to and run back to their constituents.
I would like to say that they feel more pressure to their constituents, but you know, sometimes it's difficult. You know, they're put in difficult situations, particularly when they're trying to get reelected, and you know, they need the help of the party to get, you know, reelected. You know, it's not a fun job.
I think it depends on the situation.
the dynamics of the situation. I mean, if a candidate's running in a safe district and he wants to curry favor with the party and so on, then he doesn't care so much. If it's a very close contest, then I think he's got to be really cognizant of the voters in his district and tell the party leaders to leave him alone a little bit.
Well, I think they try to please their hierarchy, and I think that they please voters in as much as they have to throw them a bone now and then.
They try to please the higher-ups instead of the constituents, the people who actually are the government, you know, government of the people, for the people, by the people. And I believe that people are not seeing it that way.
They want to impress the party leader, because the party leader is the one who makes the committee assignments.
Depends on the level of office. In a local office, like a county commission, state house, voters. When you get to the federal level, I'm afraid it's more of the party hierarchy.
Definitely party hierarchy. You know, one of the big things that we've seen in my own particular situation is the political hierarchy picks the candidate. They pick their horse and they push that horse. It's not from the voters up. So you end up with candidates that are very well connected, but not necessarily very effective.
I think it depends where they are in their career. The lower down they are, probably it's easier to please voters because they have to worry about getting elected. But presidents do their greatest things their second term because they don't have to worry about politics anymore.
Tending to vote along party lines is a very rational thing to do. If you get to the point where you think merely knowing what the character of a person is by virtue of their party label, then I think you've taken something that is potentially good and you've made it pathological.
Hierarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a lot of people to start getting involved before they start worrying about their job. Otherwise, they have better benefits from pleasing the hierarchy.
In the 1940s, liberals had wanted reform that they believed would reduce conservative power. In the mid-1970s, House liberals pushed through some rule changes that diminished the power of seniority. This was possible because liberal numbers had increased due to the class of '75, the Watergate babies elected in 1974. Seniority was dethroned in 1975. Senate Democrats and Republicans in both chambers adopted similar rules, ending the formal deference to seniority. But in practice, both parties rarely used the new power until the Republican takeover in the 1990s. Political scientists found that committee chairmen, as well as senior members closest in line for vacant chairmanships, were voting with their party much more often by the early 1980s than they had in the early 1970s. Under the new system, with no guarantees of advancement, junior members also felt heightened pressure. Basically, after seniority fell, no one in Congress was immune from party discipline. Under the new rules, scores were kept every day on how representatives voted, how much money they raised, and how reliably they stood with their faction. That shift from seniority to merit empowered the ideological majority in each party with much greater leverage to demand conformity and reduce the probability for deal-making with the other side. After Republicans took control of Congress in 1994, they imposed another set of reform, and the full potential of these decisions began to be felt. My next question was, how does partisanship affect our political system?
Partisanship can be a good way to bring people in where they don't usually care, but at the same time, when it goes too far, it can be bad because nothing gets done.
To be honest, I think that my hope for the future is that we become more partisan than we are right now.
The parties also become largely vehicles for mobilizing the money machine. That makes the average politician is now somebody who sort of climbs a ladder and shoots for success by being accomplished in that realm, as opposed to being accomplished in the arts of legislating.
It could be otherwise because they give the voter the ability to learn about the candidates. Sometimes it's not always the correct or everything that they should know about it, but it's something. If we didn't have the two parties how would everybody learn about the candidates that are running? Where would the money come that would support the candidates to run? So it's helpful to the voter. In some ways, though, I don't like the control that the parties sometimes gain.
The distortions the partisanship has put on the electoral process have caused representatives who actually don't represent even a majority in a lot of cases. They've managed to cobble together a couple of special interests, and often, once in power, they don't even deliver on to the promises they made to those special interests. So those people lost out, right? They voted for somebody who effectively betrayed them.
It's a part of what our politics have become. It's a necessary evil. I personally feel that the two-party system, the majority two-party system that we have now, is inadequate, and I think that though that both parties have divergence in them, I think that overall many people find themselves left outside of both parties as far as what they find really important.
Well, I actually think a large agreement is good because it causes lines to be drawn where people can measure their own beliefs. If there were no parties, if there were no philosophical divides, I think it might be harder to create legislation, create programs of value.
I think it's the old divide and conquer strategy. Us against them, they're bad, we're good, right? Unfortunately, so many people fall for that.
I have many friends that are elected Republican officials and many friends that are elected Democratic officials. As the power shifts, they're forced to acquiesce to things they don't necessarily agree to be part of their party. And at the federal level and even at the local level, rewards are given out to those who play the partisan game properly.
The first party system is a term used to describe the political system existing roughly from 1792 to 1824. It featured the Federalist Party, which was created by Alexander Hamilton, and the Democratic Republican Party, which was created by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. The first party system ended in 1824 as the Federalist Party shrunk to a few strongholds. In 1829, as the second party system emerged, the Democratic Republican Party split into two factions, the Jacksonian faction and the Henry Clay faction, which was absorbed by Clay's party, which was a coalition of national Republicans and other opponents of Andrew Jackson. The second party system was characterized by rising levels of voter interest, partisan newspapers, and a higher degree of personal loyalty to parties. In the 1960s, on a series of conflict-ridden issues, the parties took positions that transmitted more ideological signals to voters. Over time, the voters responded to those signals by sorting themselves between the two parties. As the parties became more ideologically cohesive, they increasingly elevated leaders who sent those strong ideological signs. The 60s had brought about dealing with important yet incendiary issues, forcing the two parties to take sides on subjects which had divided the country: the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, legalizing abortion, crime, and school busing. Both parties experienced some internal division on these issues, but over time each party became predominantly identified with one viewpoint. Here are some viewpoints that party members shared about identity and race.
As you know, we've all been, I should say, convinced to vote Democrat, just because I think people identify African Americans with Democrats because of all of our schools. On election day, and then we had a little mock election, you know, talking about like the third grade, and I was the only person voting for Reagan. And why are you voting for Reagan? He's not for black people. I mean, that's what they hear. They have to hear it at home, you know? What do you mean he's not for black people?
Why do you think 90% of the eligible black Americans vote Democrat?
I think part of it goes back to the African American, or African Americans traditionally have a history of voting for Democrats. I mean, that hadn't always been, you know, when Lincoln emancipated the slaves, Republicans did that. So, but it
there
switched.
was kind of like a switching, and
there
then
was a switch.
the South, after civil rights went.
There was a huge switch, and I think over the past, you know, few decades, it's just been a history where we just vote with what we know. I think some of that is because we're politically knowledgeable on certain situations, and a lot of African American representatives are Democrats.
Yeah.
And you know, if that's what you see in your community and you see things getting done in your community, that's what you're gonna vote for.
Well, what did you think of the Michael Steele appointment?
Well, I thought it was a ploy to attract more minorities to the party, which I think it failed
Do you think
miserably.
he would have gotten the appointment if Barack hadn't had such political success? Okay.
Not at all.
So
Not
it's
at
their affirmative action?
I believe so.
Okay.
Mike's been involved in politics for 20 years, okay? But what do we see him as? We see him as a throwback because it's a black president, you know? So where he just can't be a true Republican, and he's there because he's a great leader for the party. Colin Powell is seen as a very, very strong Republican, you know? Seen as someone that can identify with wealthy individuals.
Well, what did you think? We were talking about when Harry Belafonte made the house nigger reference to him. What did you think? Do you remember that time period when it happened?
I
and
do.
What were you thinking?
I love Harry Belafonte. He is, in my opinion, a national treasure.
Okay.
And when he said it, he's always been political.
Yeah.
You know, he's always been that way. So it wasn't a surprise that he said it.
Do you think it was appropriate?
It's hard for me to say no.
I still get things like that on a regular basis.
Do you really?
You know, I went to buy a car about a month or two ago, and the person that was dealing with the salesman found out what prep school I went to in New Jersey. So the first thing he says to me was, "Oh, is he one of them uppity Negroes?" You know?
Wow.
I went to an all-boys white prep school my whole life. You know? So this is a black person saying it, not a white person.
Winner Rick Goddard, the Republican candidate for Congress from the 8th District in the state of Georgia. You will recall that last week an already elected Georgia Republican named Lynn Westmoreland called Barack and Michelle Obama, quote, uppity. On a radio show in the town of Macon, candidate Goddard complained about part of MSNBC's coverage of the Republican National Convention. Quote, last night, Newt Gingrich disarmed a very uppity newscaster who tried to question him on the capabilities and leadership of Governor Palin. Payne claims Stoddard meant arrogant or presumptuous. Great, General, but you said uppity, which is traditionally followed by the N-word.
I believe that a lot of African Americans voted for him because we just never seen an African American, and I have no problem with that. You have a lot of African Americans who were killed, who were murdered, who had to walk 30 miles just to go vote and were turned away and had to go back home. Poll taxes, things that my generation didn't have to deal with just so that we can vote. So the fact that you want to vote for him because he's a black man, I have no problem with. As far as...
Do you think identity politics, that's kind of identity politics.
It
Do you
is.
think that's becoming more prevalent, or it's kind of something that's always been there? It's just it showed more in the black community.
It's always been there.
Okay.
It's always been there. One of the things that one of my political associates said that we've always voted for white men, and no one's ever questioned, are you voting for this white man because he's white? And now we're questioning, are you just voting for him because he's a black man? We've never. This is uncharted territory for us. As far as what it did for race relations, I think it did nothing for it. I celebrate him and I appreciate what he's been able to do as a man and as an African American. Yeah. But as far as moving us forward racially, I think it's actually set us back.
Now the political system has evolved to a point where elected officials in the major parties feel comfortable mostly advancing ideas only acceptable to their base. For most of our history, American political parties had functioned as loose coalitions. Because the parties were diverse, they had usually operated as forces that synthesized the diverse interests and diverse views in American society. The next question I asked was, do you think there's a growing partisan divide? And here's what party members said.
I don't like, being partisan. I believe, looking at, I don't like looking at, the R or the D in front of someone's name or whatever, if they're Green Party, Libertarian, Constitution Party or whatever. I look at their actions and results.
Voting record.
Right.
Yeah.
I completely agree. When you're so partisan, it's like tunnel vision, and you don't think appropriately. You just don't think.
Because Americans share a lot more in their values and their interests and their concerns than you would ever know by watching the media or reading the blogs who tend to be on one side or the other.
Once some people find out, your party affiliation, they treat you differently. Or
Really?
Yeah. Because I worked in a law firm that was very Republican, and once they realized that I was not one of them, it was.
It changed your work.
Yeah, it did. And people made fun of me because I was like the only one.
When both parties get together and they really work together, then they're really good at screwing us.
I think we're more partisan now than we've ever been.
There is no partisanship. It's all about power for the state.
I think partisanship has destroyed the political system.
There is this vicious cycle where in-depth discussion of serious issues are often obscured by the politics of spin that emphasizes harsh political attacks which are fueled by large sums of money. Special interests often use partisanship as a tool to achieve their immediate goals. I wanted to find out who is harmed by partisanship, and this is what they said.
Unfortunately, the working class, families.
I think we're all harmed by partisanship, frankly.
My own personal point of view, I don't believe anybody is harmed.
The nation.
The uneducated.
Well, I think our democracy is harmed by partisanship.
Blind partisanship is one symptom of a divorce from reality, I think.
In George Washington's farewell address, he warned of the baneful effects of the spirit of the party. He described that spirit as unfortunate and inseparable from human nature. He also said that the alternate domination of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge natural to party dissension, always distracts the public council and agitates the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms. My next question was, is voting down party lines healthy by voters and by politicians?
I think it's about as healthy as putting a blindfold on and a gag in your mouth and following orders like a zombie.
No. Okay. I think that's the worst thing that ever happened.
I'll say though that I've been guilty of it.
Yeah.
If I don't really know who they are, I'll vote for more Democrat than I will Republican.
I would say no for both.
Okay.
No for the voters, because to me, voting party line, you're basically a robot at that point.
Voting down party lines is lazy. It's not healthy in the slightest.
Yes. And the reason I think that is because you're really voting a party philosophy when you vote.
But if you've always identified with Democrats or if you've always identified with Republicans, I guess I would say I'd rather you vote a straight party ticket, than just leaving the ballot completely blank.
Absolutely not. Of course not. No, it means that we have people who have no opinion.
I don't really believe in anything that the other side believes in.
Yeah.
So although I don't want to say I vote just because they're Republican, to me, some of the worst Republicans, I'm going to have more in common with them than some of the best liberals.
Which voting for anybody based strictly on party affiliation is throwing your vote away, in my opinion.
During previous decades, no matter which party held the White House or Congress, power had been divided in practice because of the differences with each party. After Johnson's presidency, voters consistently divided power between the parties. In 24 years, from 1968 through 1992, from Nixon's election through to the defeat of George H.W. Bush, America provided one-party unified control of government only once, when Democrats held the House and Senate during Jimmy Carter's presidency. Otherwise, America split power between Republican presidents in the White House and Democrats controlling the House for all of those 24 years and the Senate for all but the first 6 years of Ronald Reagan's presidency. The next two questions that I asked were to see how introspective and analytical party members were capable of being. They were, what do you think is each party's strength and appeal? And what do you think is each party's weakness?
I would say Republicanism works well as long as you're healthy, have a job, and don't become disabled or ill, and have the education and the resources. The Democrats tend to be stronger with people who are sensitive to people that, due to no ill action on their own, become disabled, ill, hurt. I'm working on the homeless issues we have here. And Democrats have more of a sensitivity that some things can spin out of control beyond the individual's needs.
You know, one thing that I've always admired about the Republican Party is that they'll do whatever it takes to win, no matter what it is. And I wish that Democrats would actually take on that attitude or something.
Yeah.
Well, I think the Republicans, they have very clear-cut answers for different problems. I think they tend to be superficial and emotional.
I think in the case of the Republicans, the appeal for them seems to be a combination of for people who have done well in their life and career and have made pretty good money. It's sort of, I've made mine, you make yours, but keep your hands off mine.
The Democrats have developed a tactic of these short bursts, these short sound bites, and that generates a lot of interest in people. It makes sense.
I would say the strength of the Democratic Party is its ability to, whether it's on the surface or deep, I'm not going to pretend I know because I'm not a Democrat, its strength lies in making it seem or making people believe that they are the party that is for the people.
The Republican Party appeals to people with an urge for violence and sadistic tendencies. I think the Democratic Party appeals to masochists and people who want to sort of whip themselves and suffer and enjoy it and moan about it very loudly.
The Democrats seem to appear to favor the common man.
I think that the Democrats are definitely, they have the youth vote. They're appealing to people who Obama's whole change. They have the media, they have MTV, they have Nickelodeon, they have everything geared toward young people. They market well. They market well. They seem very appealing to, I think, people who don't know what's going on and want to get involved for the first time.
What about Republicans? What do you think is their weakness?
Their weakness is the fact that they rely so heavily with the religious base.
I think the Republican Party, again, is just not fighting back.
And of the Democratic Party, I would say civil liberties.
There's a lot of Republicans which push forward that notion that if you smoke marijuana now, you'll be a heroin addict. And I'm like, well, I know a lot of people that smoke, and they're not shooting up.
If either party had all the answers, they would get in power and things would get better. But things keep getting worse. So obviously there's fundamental flaws in both parties.
Less and less of a percentage of our population believes in the American dream today because less and less of a percentage of our population is participating in the American dream.
No matter what your political slant, we are all aware that lobbying and interest groups have changed the playing field. So I did ask, do you think lobbying and interest groups have had any effect on partisanship? And this is what they said.
I mean, the influence of lobbies in American politics has always been problematic.
But I think all the lobbyists and the political action groups should be thrown out of Washington, D.C.
If you walk in as a lobbyist and say, we'll help your campaign, here's a donation, that you're going to expect something from that.
So special interests, campaign financiers, attorneys, banks, other interests, corporate interests are going to control them.
Point where the lobbyists are the power, the lobbyists make more money, and the Congress members and senators, especially senators, make their decisions based on what lobby firm they're going to go work for when they're done being a senator. I mean,
I think lobbying and interest groups don't really care if it's Republicans or Democrats that they're talking to. They just want to get their bills passed, and they seek out whoever can be purchased.
The 1960s contributed to an enormous wave of skepticism about authority. New groups dedicated to purifying government or curbing the power of business popped up all over Washington. These new groups both pressured and empowered. Sometimes the groups bullied legislators to promote their causes. Sometimes the legislators courted these groups to advance their causes. These groups promoted responses to questionnaires and gave grades to legislators on scorecards. The way politicians in each party related to these groups provided an easy measurement for the press and activists to determine where everyone stood on the ideological spectrum. To some extent, these groups seized from elected officials the power to determine for the public who was good and who was bad. Most of the new groups portrayed themselves as nonpartisan, but truthfully, most of them received most of their support from one of the two major parties. Another factor that's worth discussing is the media. So I asked, has the media and the blogosphere had any effect on partisanship?
I think that there was a time when networks considered news a public service and they didn't expect to make money on news. And that somewhere along the way changed.
You know, as far as many of the media is concerned, there are only two parties.
Because you have so many bloggers out there on either side of the aisle, just really saying things that politicians couldn't say, and I think that they really fan the fire of the parties not being able to get along.
The power of the press goes to those who own them, and those who own them know that. Of course, anybody can be the press now by putting a website on there, and I think that's diluted the credibility of the press.
But all major news media do compromise and shade things because of profit motives and money and so on.
During the early days of our republic, some newspapers received the bulk of their money from political factions because they were willing to print rumors and gossip about the private lives of candidates. George Washington was accused by some papers of being impotent and by others of fathering dozens of illegitimate children. Abraham Lincoln was reported to be a Negro and his wife a Confederate spy. But then there was also a span of time in the 20th century when the press looked the other way as politicians engaged in behavior that voters would not have been happy about. Some took part in very inappropriate relationships, and some representatives were so drunk that they had to be carried off the floors of the House and Senate. Television changed everything. It began to allow the public to directly view the action in Washington. Capitol Hill occasionally showed Senate hearings in the 1950s, but press attention intensified through the 1960s and 70s. In the 1960s, the evening newscast expanded from 15 minutes to a half hour. Then in 1980, the cable network news began the 24-hour news cycle. C-SPAN began live coverage of the House of Representatives in 1979 and the Senate 7 years later. All of this changed the audience for floor debates from fellow members to the broader public. That altered messages and the nature of debates. Speeches went from detailed arguments meant to persuade other legislators to jabs intended to move the public or rally one's base. Over the past 2 decades, significant elements in the mass media have reverted to the partisan model. Now newspapers and magazines mobilize their loyal readers behind one party and against the other. Almost every major media institution has seen its overall credibility decline. It was important to me to include other party viewpoints besides mainstream Republicans and Democrats. Here are some statements from and about independents and third parties.
A lot of people are registering independent, but what does that say? You could be, either Ralph Nader, Bernie Sanders, or Joe Lieberman. There's no platform for independence.
Yeah. I have a hard time with people that are in independent, parties because it seems destructive when we go to have primary elections, and they can't vote and they complain. It's kind of a weird thing, and they're excluded from
the process.
And I don't think that should necessarily be the case. But I like to hear what they have to say. Everyone has good ideas.
Beginning with the progressive era in the 1890s, the two parties have, in a sense, colluded to rewrite the rules of party registration, elections, a whole variety of aspects of the political system to make it more and more difficult for third parties to play that role.
80% of the people are fed up with the two parties, but yet when you put all the vote together, third parties got 1.3% of the vote in the presidential election, so 98-point-something% voted for them anyway.
One of my favorite quotes is from Daniel Gilbert, a Harvard psychology professor. He wrote, "Decision makers don't realize just how easily and often their objectivity is compromised. The human brain knows many tricks that allows it to consider evidence, weigh facts, and still reach precisely the conclusion it favors." One study he cited found that 84% of doctors suspected that their colleagues were swayed by gifts from drug companies, but only 14% thought the gifts affected their own decision making. That leads to my next question. Do you think it's possible to be ideological and pragmatic at the same time?
I think that as long as you're not lying to yourself, if you're intellectually honest, your ideologies will dictate your practicality.
Yeah, yes, I do. But they have to be a very special, strong person to do it, because they have to be able to realize that the ideologies they have can't always be achieved.
I don't think you should compromise.
Yeah.
I think you should have a high moral standard, and you should hold your elected officials to that high moral standard, and if they can't keep that, get them out.
I think you can have strong ideals, but you can, as long as you are willing to talk with people, act on diplomacy, using bipartisanship to discuss with people, to find a common ground, a common good that could be better for everybody.
Herbert F. Weisberg wrote that the general public's ability to understand ideological competition is limited. Some people view politics in this way, but others do not. This allows the parties and candidates to rely on ideology for selective campaign appeal. Within limits, they can take ideological stands to impress the attentive public while knowing that most of the public will not notice those stands enough for it to hurt them. One of my final questions is, does our politics reflect our culture, or our culture reflect our politics?
It's a really good question.
Yeah, that is a good
because
question.
To a certain extent, the American people decide what their media and what their politicians should be. Like, you get what you pay for at the store when you buy a product, but you also get what you pay for in politics. But I was in a discussion with one of my coworkers about, like, for example, the swine flu. He was trying to say that the people wanted to hear about swine flu, and I was trying to say that, well, if the media didn't tell the people about swine flu, then how would they even know about it? So it's kind of, chicken and egg kind of scenario. But I think it's the people. I mean, when the people start to wake up, like Glenn Beck is he's trying to portray himself as being an independent, and he's gotten a lot more ratings, a lot more attention nowadays. So he kind of goes with the flow.
I think in my personal opinion, I think the election last year is proof of how much our culture is affecting our politics. I think that, look at the youth vote. Every youth that I talked to that voted Democrat last year doesn't have any idea why, other than the fact that they heard a man speak or he was in their face all the time. And I'll admit, I was all for Bill Clinton because he played the sax on MTV. I mean, you're young, you're stupid, you just go for what's in your face. And so I think that large youth group is largely, and their vote was largely in due part because of our culture. And a lot of the older people too, they just would listen to the occasional news station or read the occasional paper, and those people dictate the opinions that they take on as opposed to making their own opinion.
I'm going to vote based on my individual culture. So
our culture is starting to reflect our politics.
Yeah.
Taking in God we trust off of money very slowly, covering it up during one of Obama's speeches. Those are very, very, very disconcerting to me and my friends.
And I think they both are equally involved with affecting each other. Yeah, I think that our culture is certainly a reflection of the political system. I mean, we actually inherited a great, perfect republic. We inherited a republic, meaning the citizens are supposed to be engaged and have their input and have their voice heard at every level of government, to the point where you should be required. You could almost be required. In ancient Greece, they were required to participate in their government. So today, we don't have people participating in their government enough, and that certainly is reflected in our political culture. And then our culture reflects our bad politics because our culture is not engaged enough. So yeah, they both affect each other.
Culture, by definition, changes slowly. It might then seem to follow that politics, which changes whimsically, would be driven by culture. But really, the interaction is more intimate than that, because what the world does is make a space within which people can come together to act collectively, sometimes to launch heroic projects, sometimes to do evil things.
I think there's cases of both. I mean, people make political decisions and try to frame it as cultural decisions, and they make cultural decisions and try to frame it as political decisions.
I think our politics reflects our culture. Basically, one thing I love about America is Americans are never satisfied. We're never going to be happy. We're never going to say this is perfect. And our politics are always challenging. We could have the greatest, Obama could fix the healthcare system, and someone's going to come out and say, well, here's what's wrong with this, and the political system will go to work on that issue. So yeah, I think it's culture influences politics.
I guess I'm going to have to go, it reflects our culture. I'm ashamed of that, but I guess that's the reality.
Yeah, I'd say. I mean, our culture is getting homogenized, so our politics.
Gradual changes in the daily routine and culture of politicians is also worth mentioning. The demand on representatives have multiplied. When airplane travel became more common and inexpensive, pressure grew on legislators to travel. Senate and House members were forced to devote more time to chasing checks. Another way to examine polarization is to look at the relationship between ideology and partisanship. Measurement of ideology on a scale began in 1972. The self-placement rate for both Republicans and Democrats were lowest at the beginning of the Reagan administration in 1980 and 1982. I believe that everything is meaningless if we don't consider how it affects future generations, so my final questions were about children. What are the similarities and differences in the way people with different political views raise their children, and what have party members watched the children in their lives learn concerning politics?
Well, yeah, I think people who are typically, in my experience, more conservative people typically are more religious, thus they're more inclined to sacrifice. So they view their primary role of a parent as one who provides for their children to have their children prosper further than they were able to. When you're talking about people who are, in my experience, liberals, they tend to be more me-centered. Typically don't have families that often, and if they do, their children are seen more of a project, like a pet would be, or a fancy remodel on their house. They don't really, in my experience, see their children as important to society.
But I think there are certainly tendencies, and there are tendencies among those who are more authoritarian, more disciplinarian, more strict and more pedantic to be Republican, and among those who, you know, when you hear about terrible twos and so forth, well, this is because children are not speaking when spoken to and they're doing what their parents want. The parent puts the kid there, he's supposed to stay there, you know. But people who think that's not appropriate for human beings, even though they're only two, and are not upset by children having their own opinions and learning by experimenting and so on, and think it's absolutely barbaric to discipline their children with physical violence, and counterproductive to bribe them and reward them like they're rats in a lab and to sit them in a corner when they've done something wrong. Those people tend to be more liberal in their politics.
I was raised in a Democratic family and just followed what my parents did. I can look at our kids and our grandkids, and they're just following along. At some point, they'll look at the two parties and make their own decisions. I don't think people raise children any differently.
The Democrats, you're going to have, I've seen as more people are more socially conscious, like, look, we got to remember the other person, you know, whereas the Republicans, from what I have experienced, are like, the most important person is you.
If you get a more liberal point of view, it's like, I'll use the term laissez-faire, okay? It doesn't bother me, shouldn't bother anybody else. You know, they take a kind of, how could I describe it, a nonchalant attitude towards that. That could be detrimental to a child who, if they aren't brought up in a disciplined home, if they aren't disciplined in school, and I'm talking about discipline in terms of being able to pay attention, to listen respectfully to individuals who have maybe a different point of view or a different attitude, different approach, or a different value system, showing respect, consideration for that individual. Things can go wrong, and I've seen a lot of that.
I hope they don't see that it's all fighting all the time, because sometimes you do see a lot of that, or name calling or blaming. And I hope that they see that our country is a good country, and it's made up of good people.
In my teaching career, I met parents who are Republicans, parents who are Democrats. They all want the best things for their kids. Most of the students that I've had vote in our little classroom mock elections because that's who they think their parents are going to vote for.
The term groupthink is an important part of any discussion about partisanship. Groupthink is a term coined by social psychologist Irving Janis. It is defined as occurring when a group makes faulty decisions because group pressures lead to a deterioration of mental efficiency, reality testing, and moral judgment. Groups affected by groupthink ignore alternatives and tend to take irrational actions that dehumanize other groups. A group is especially vulnerable to groupthink when its members are similar in background and when the group is insulated from outside viewpoints. I have concluded that groupthink inevitably occurs to different degrees as a byproduct of partisanship. Wherever you land on the political divide, it's your personal responsibility to not let others form and shape your opinions for you. Our conclusions about partisanship might not be the same, but it's definitely something that needs to be discussed more.
More like the home of the broke, flooded by snakes, crooks, fiends strung out on dope. Watching our every move, they got us close in the scope. If you buck and get out of line, they will smoke you just like a pope. Maybe needing some diapers, just spend the money you're posting. You wonder why all these kids are lost without no hope, no guidance, no vision. The politics and religions. Did you ever stop to think how you left them in that position? And you want me to believe you supposed to be G when you continue to play the role and poison these seeds? You do the work for the people, so why should I follow you? When my verses move the people like them hollows when they shoot. I'm ill, so sick, take a look into my brain. I'm cold, need a blanket, I am freezing in my pain. If we work with each other, there's a hope for brighter days. All you suckers need to vanish, disappear and go away. Ow!
Police, cruisers, prostitutes and movers, pimps, addicts and shooters, these little niggas that do ya. Churches and liquor stores, martini bars and jack shot. Neighborhood with daycares and crack spots. Pill heads, homeless and syrup sippers. Gangsters, God-fearing and strippers. Gun toters and book holders. The land with the young go before the older. Living life like a soldier, my Dutch burn for the missing. Liquor soaked in the dust. Fire bring like division from clouds of burning bush. Politicians and lawyers, doctors, judges and killers. True ride or die niggas, authentic snakes and squillers. We trap, can't see further than a stop sign. What's around the corner? Could it be this little light of mine? I take it step by step through the valley, awaken the dry bones. Giving sight to the blind, cause this is what we call home.